The debt at that airport's 10 billion and more on 1.5 billion in revenue. That's a debt to revenue of 700 to 800%, John. I've never seen a debt to revenue of 700 to 800%. You would never get that in the real world of business. They call that airport a business. They say it doesn't affect your taxes. We create our own revenue here. But what they're doing is they're taking our money and giving it to the bank. So every time we use that airport, we're paying 40% more than we should for parking, for rental fees, customer fees, passenger fees, all these fees that go on your airline ticket that are going to the city of Denver. Banks continue to lend money to that airport as much as they can because they know darn well that they are going to get paid. They know that airport is going to take as much money from you and me every time we use it and all the other citizens, and they're going to pay the banks. That airport, it would be bankrupt in the real world of business. You would never, ever get that much debt. You would never, ever get up to 700% debt to revenue in the real world of business. But it's a government monopoly that has government authority to take as much money from you and I as they want.
The national debt has never been higher, about 120% of GDP. I mean, it's a problem. But, fortunately here locally, we don't have any debt issues in Colorado, or particularly in municipal areas, including cities. So citizens for no more debt. Do I have that right, Jason?
Citizens for no new debt.
For no new debt.
Yes, sir.
Jason Bailey, who has this new organization, no new debt? First of all, before we talk about the new debt, tell me a little bit about the old debt. You're focusing in mostly on Denver. What is Denver's old debt?
Well, I'm focusing in on Denver right now. My overall focus is going to be the state of Colorado and all the municipalities. Inglewood keeps taking on more debt, and on and on and on. And so, people, I get asked, so where do we start? We got so much debt. Where do we start? Well, we start with no new debt. That's where we need to start. And so that's why I named my organization Citizens for No New Debt.
That almost sounds very much like the first rule of holes. When you find yourself in a hole, stop digging.
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
you find yourself in a debt problem, stop adding to the debt.
Yeah.
Easier said than done. There are some protections against debt on different levels. The federal government has no protection on debt. They can go into debt as much as they like, as much as the special interests want. And the Federal Reserve gets to print up money as much as they want. It's beautiful. The state has a balanced budget amendment. Technically, the state cannot go into debt. They can do certificates of participation. They can do debt packages with voter approval. So how much debt does Denver have? I'm just curious. Can we start off with that?
Well, did you say...
And what is the debt for?
Sure. The debt is always for spending money that they don't have, whatever they, say it is for the day. They'll generally say something like maintenance. They'll talk about these critical issues. But, if you take all your budget money and you move it around with like a shell game, the debt's just going into funding, as far as I'm concerned, the overall system.
But isn't most debt for specific projects? Hey, we want to build a convention center. We need to have debt for that. We're going to build a stadium. We need to have a debt package for that. Isn't that how it usually is done?
Well, I think that's often the case. This particular debt that they're asking for this November, it's called a general obligation bond, and they're talking about parks and recreational centers and things like that. But I also think that they're going to spend the money on whatever they want, without violating the law too much.
Well, money is fungible.
When they get the money, And did you mention certificates of participation?
I did, or at least I've done it many times.
Yeah.
So our taxpayer bill of rights is very clear. If a government, any district in Colorado is going to go into debt, they've got to ask us. So if they're going to put out bonds, they get to ask us. They have to ask us. But then the Supreme Court said, if you call debt by a different name, you don't need to ask. And they came up with the name certificates of participation. So instead of having one bond for 30 years, you have 30 bonds for 1 year each, and that is a certificate of participation. By the way, Thanks for the real Coca-Cola.
You're welcome.
I haven't had
Cheers,
Coca-Cola
John.
in a bottle since I was a kid. And this is Heco in Mexico, or Hecho in
Yeah,
Mexico.
yes.
So it's got the real sugar in it.
Yes, yes. And it just tastes great.
Can you really tell the difference between this and regular Coke?
Well, I can, yeah.
Really?
But sure.
I just miss the bottle.
Regular Coke
The
tastes a little more
bottle.
synthetic.
It does. All right, so get to certificates of participation for me.
So you're asking with the city of Denver how much debt. So how much a certificate of participation does the city of Denver have? And I don't know. I'm working on that. They have an 800-page budget, and they like to hide all this stuff. They don't make it easy for anybody to get all the numbers. So I don't have all the numbers, but I have a different view. It's a philosophical view that our government should just operate with no debt. And I think you kind of have the same view as well, too. They should operate with no debt. Government debt just is counterproductive. It makes no sense regardless of how much we already have or what they say they're going to use it for.
The argument would go the other way of there are projects that need to happen, and you can either save up for the project, and maybe you keep up with inflation and you save it. Weld County is the only county in Colorado that has no debt, and they pay for things with cash. They also have a very lucrative oil and gas fields there that pay severance taxes to them, so they have a better revenue source. Sometimes the argument is, hey, we need to build this highway. So let's get the debt now, build the highway, and we'll pay it off as we go. In the same way people buy houses. Why would that be a bad way to do things?
Well, as far as buying houses, I love the idea of a mortgage because you're going to either, own or rent, and owning is a much better deal if you can make it happen. A lot of people can't make it happen, or for one reason or another don't want to. They know they're going to be moving in 2 years, whatever. But a home mortgage is great. All forms of debt need to be seen for what they are, and some make sense and some don't make sense. Home mortgage makes a lot of sense to me. Government debt never makes sense. Maybe a paycheck loan. If it's going to make the difference between whether you eat dinner tonight or not. But for the most part, a paycheck loan would never make sense when you're going to be giving up 50% of your check for fees and interest. So each form of debt, business debt makes a lot of sense if it pans out. You get the volume, you get the margin, and it pans out. That's what it's about. You pay off the debt, you put some profit in your pocket.
But that's the private sector.
Exactly.
And the creditor of last resort is the guy who got the loan. And if he doesn't pay it back, the creditors are on the hook. When it comes to government debt, we're on the hook.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The taxpayers pay for all of this. And all the talk about default, which is where a lot of the talk ends up a lot about, is it sustainable in default? I don't really focus on that much at all because to me that's pretty much a straw argument. The banks pretty much always get paid. I mean, how many tens of thousands of cities do we have across the U.S. and how many have gone bankrupt? I think Detroit maybe went bankrupt, but for the city of Denver, default is not the problem. The problem is the cost of that debt today, tomorrow, yesterday. It's the ongoing cost of that debt is the problem. I think the banks are going to get paid, and the banks go to the top of the budget because they always get paid. So, when the city of Denver, like for right now, they have this budget deficit problem that they're talking about. They'll start cutting arts, and some of those arts should be cut. They'll start cutting services, and some of those services should be cut. And they'll start cutting payroll, and some of that payroll should be cut. But the banks never get cut. The banks always get paid. So you can put them right at the top of the budget. And
well, isn't there a contractual obligation to pay those? I mean, it's not like you can tell your mortgage company, I'm sorry, but things are tight, and so you're going to be the last one to get paid. I'll go, okay, that's great, but you're going to default on your loan, and we're going to sell your house.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
And you don't think that happens in the public sector?
Like I said, I think Detroit went bankrupt, and I think there's been a few other municipalities that have, but I would say 99% of the time it doesn't, which is probably a very different ratio than a home mortgage situation.
So help me understand. I know you're focusing a lot on an election coming up this fall. What is Denver going to ask for, and what will we get for it if we say yes? And why is it you want us to vote no?
Well, I want people to vote no because it's counterproductive waste of taxpayer money. So what they're still deciding on the tier 1 and tier 2 groups of I call it the Christmas in July list that they're working on. And that's still changing quite a bit. Maybe more park out there off Colorado Boulevard.
This is a general obligation bond, right?
Yeah.
How much is it supposed to be for? Do you know?
Well, their ask is about 800 million.
$800 million.
Yeah.
That's a lot of ask.
Oh, absolutely.
And so their job is to dress it up in a way that voters find it desirable. So it's not going to be for things that people don't like. They always have to put the stuff that people do want, parks and infrastructure and things that people don't want. When you boil it down, people should vote no against this proposal because why?
Well, it depends if you're on the left or right. And so I'll talk about, I call it the cult of Denver, which tends to be on the left, and they're the ones who are going to do most of the voting in this November. From the left, I mean, you should say no because you are going to get more parks for the city by saying no to debt per dollar of revenue. And that's all you have as a city is revenue. I mean, debt is not revenue. Bonds are not revenue. They're debt. And revenue is the only way to revenue, money from the people to the city, whether you call it a tax or a fee. There is no other way for our government to get money other than that. So, my messaging it tends to be in the middle, but I really know the cult of Denver well. And
give me a definition of the cult of Denver.
They're focused on what they're going to get, and they're not really even thinking about who's going to pay for it or why or how.
When you say they, do you mean voters or do you mean the bureaucracy?
Same thing, really.
Listen, we all want something for nothing. Yeah. And it's really wonderful to rack up your credit cards. I mean, nothing feels better than coming home with a big screen TV that you haven't felt the pain for. There's something different when you save up the money and it's in your hand and you hand it to the guy before you get the TV set. It hurts a lot more. It's amazing when you do your life in cash, real cash, how much money you save because there's just something that goes, wow, that hurts more than just whipping out a card and it doesn't hurt. And you pay off a little bit of that. Do you believe this $800 million is going secretly for operations? In other words, Denver is wildly underfunded right now, largely because we're giving lots of benefits to transient people who now have hotel rooms, and then a swarm of illegal immigrants who come in, and they are getting lots of city benefits and homes and food and roofs over their head. I have this suspicion that somehow this debt, which is supposed to go to tangible things that are paid off, actually find their way into daily operations.
I think they can massage the numbers and try to stay out of trouble while moving money around. I call it budget mind. For me, I want to look at how much total does the city of Denver get and how much do they spend.
How much does the city get, do you know?
Well, the non-enterprise revenue, I believe it's about 1.5 billion, and that's sales tax and other taxes. And then the enterprises, which is going to include the airport and things like that, takes it up to about 4.5 billion. The airport's an independent entity. It's called an enterprise. It'd be like you or I with an LLC. We own it, but it's a separate entity. The city of Denver owns it.
Let me see if I got those numbers right. When government calls something a fee, it goes to an enterprise. And when they call something a fee, they don't have to ask permission to tax. They just create an enterprise. Yeah. You're telling me that $1.8 billion is what we bring in, what Denver brings in tax revenue, but in total it's $4.5 billion. So most of the money that comes in terms of fees.
Well, that airport's about 1.5 billion, and I believe that the sales tax and other taxes for the city of Denver is about 1.5 billion. But I'm not an expert on the exact numbers. I would have to double check this. But the budget mind, I just see so much of it as a shell game moving. I mean, so, this particular bureaucracy, this overhead, is this going to be under this budget line or this budget line or this budget line? And is this finance department going to be under this? And what about the mayor's salary? Is that under this one or that one or that one? I think they get to massage that however they want. But as far as the voters of Denver, I think the main message is you will get more park. You will get more recreational centers. We will have more for the city if we do not use debt. And when you're talking about the cost of that debt, then we're talking more on the right, because I have noticed just a large gap between the two. I got one email that said, "I know it's your tax money and all. It's just a disdain for the person who pays the money."
How do you mean?
Well, a lot of the voters of Denver, if you even talk about tax money, you're already negative. You're in the hole. And they don't want to hear the word tax. They just want to hear budget. So, on the left, I talk about budget. You are going to have more budget for your city if we do not use debt. It's basic math, John. If you have $10 a budget and you give $5 to Chase Bank, you have $5 left for the city. That's my overall message for the voters this November.
Your message for people who want to see more with their dollar is that you are spending money on interest payments when instead that interest payment could be put into services for Denver.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you agree with me. It's not their dollar; it's the city's dollar, and the city took our dollar, so it's really our dollar that they're.
Agreed.
But exactly. It's basic math. A lot of these voters, and you were saying, Denver generally gets the debt it wants. Well, no time like the present to change that.
And taxes in this city always pass. Debt packages in most school districts always pass. And when it's time for a mill levy override, they always seem to pass. It's standard operating procedure. Do you really think you got a shot at defeating this?
Yeah, I do. Last November, Mayor Johnson wanted another half-point sales tax for his so-called affordable housing. I call it government housing. He lost that bid, and he was really behind it. The city, Denver City Council was really behind that. And the voters, everybody kind of thought the voters were going to bring this in, but the voters said no.
The voters last year said, no thanks. I don't want to pay more in sales tax. Mm-hmm. The difference with the debt package is how it is put together on the ballot. I promise you the first few words will be without raising taxes. So a voter seems to think, I can vote yes for a tax or for a debt increase. And look, here's a list of the things I'm going to get. This park, this bike path, this road improvement, this safety improvement, all this good stuff without a tax increase. Mm-hmm. Would you argue it's actually a tax increase, or is it just misspent money?
Well, it's both. It's not a direct tax increase, but it's impossible to repay debt on average without giving twice as much tax money to the bank before you have it all paid off. So to talk about no new taxes as you campaign for more debt like the mayor is doing, it's just a straw argument. On November 4th, there will be no new taxes on the ballot per se, but they will raise taxes the day after November 4th. They will raise taxes the day before November 4th, and fees or taxes, of course, money from the citizens to the government. It's a continual process of gaslighting, and this idea of no new taxes. But there's a lot of problems with how people see debt too. Let me share a story with you if I could. So my friend Adam, he has a restaurant here in Denver, known him for 20 years. Ran into him over at La Loma a couple weeks ago. He said, hey, if Denver would clean up downtown and reduce that violence, we'd have a lot more sales tax, and we wouldn't have to go after that new debt. I gave him one of these yellow postcards. And it seems to make sense It seems to make sense, and he's a smart business person. It seems to make sense.
I've known more and more people who avoid downtown Denver. And I know we can talk about the numbers and the mayor can say how safe the place is. It sure doesn't feel safe. And people don't come down here as much as they did. Or if they do, they come for the show, they come for the event, but they don't linger the way they used to. They don't go to the restaurants, they don't go to the bars, they don't hang out because they don't feel safe.
It feels so different than it used to. So I mentioned to Adam, I said, the idea that we need to clean up downtown and we need to reduce that violence, absolutely. And that will bring sales tax up, absolutely. And that's a problem. I'm going to call that problem number one. Now, if you put debt onto that, you now have problem number two. And problem number two does not solve problem number one. I call that the dogma of debt. The idea that debt will fill in for this sales tax that we're not getting. Well, it's just the opposite, because debt is not revenue. Debt will always take twice as much revenue on average before you get the banks paid off. So we went from one problem to two problems. I would rather have one problem than two problems. To bring on debt as though that's going to help the situation, well, of course it never does. If you look at the amount of debt service that we've paid to the bank, the city of Denver, over, say, the past 5 to 10 years, including, certificates of participation, we're talking billions, okay? That, even if it was, say, 1.5 billion, that would pretty much buy everything on Mayor Johnston's Christmas in July list that he's working on right now. Everything would have already been already purchased with that money if that's what they wanted to use that money for.
I'll look at the federal budget just as a point of contrast. I don't like spending money on the military. Nobody does, but it is a core function of the federal government. It's right there in the Constitution. Right now, we spend more money on interest on the national debt than we do on military. So we are spending more just to pay off loans, just the interest on the loans, not the principal of the loans. We are just paying more in interest than we are protecting the nation from bad guys. Mm-hmm. And so as interest payments and interest rates go up, as debt continues to increase, that number doesn't get smaller, it gets bigger. Yeah. And it squeezes out other aspects of the budget. So sooner or later, we're going to have the major driver of the federal budget be interest payments. Might be my kid's problem, might be my grandkids' problem, but on the trajectory we're on, it is inevitable. So I look at the city government or the state government or any other government that's rolling with the same sort of play, and I wonder, wait a second, how much of our money is going to pay interest payments versus services? Again, I look to Weld County. Whatever you think of Weld County, these guys don't have any debt. Out of 65 counties, there's only one that has nothing on the balance sheets, which means if things go bad, if interest rates go skyrocketing, their taxpayers are not on the hook for anything. That seems to me to be fiscally responsible, and in the long run, more stuff, more services. Yeah. The new highway they have, a few years back, they built a whole new jail, and they did it with cash. Yeah. But that's a discipline that most politicians and bureaucracies don't have. Yeah. Because you're not rewarded for saving money, you're rewarded for spending it.
Yeah, and they want to manifest their policies. They've been thinking about this political seat for 10 years. They finally get it, and they arrive and they sit down and, there's no money in the budget. You see that with Denver City Council. So, well, let's go borrow money. But yeah, this debt is it's everywhere. It's you just look around. It's like mice. So the city of Denver, the Denver Public Schools, the Denver Water Department, the airport. You talk about a waste of money. I mean, 40% of the revenue at that airport goes for debt service. The banks own the revenue at that airport. 60% is going for the airport. I visited my dad for 4 days last week. I parked at that airport for 4 days. When I drove over there, both economy lots were full and you couldn't get into them. So I parked in the garage. It was $35 a day. I paid $140 to park 4 days at that airport. Now, if you look at the budgets, and I brought the airport financial, the parking last year, 2024, they brought in $235 million in parking fees. parking costs. $235 million in parking, which, by the
That's
way,
revenue to the airport.
yeah. They paid to the banks $554 million. So if you took all the money for all the parking out there, double it, you still haven't paid the debt service. So when we pay those ridiculous amounts to park out there, double that, and give that to Goldman Sachs and Chase Bank, that's what they're doing. They're taking our money and trickling it up. But that's what government does. It trickles money up. It takes the money from the people, our politicians give it to the banking system. It's hard to not talk about the banking system.
Well, then talk to me about the banking system.
Yeah.
It seems like you've got some anger towards the banking system. What is it?
I'm tough on that.
Yeah, tell me about it, because I've got a house and I wouldn't be able to afford it without a loan. I keep my money in a bank. What is it that bothers you about the bank? And when you say banks, you're talking investment firms, you're talking about bond dealers, you're talking about the financial packages that these services put together.
Well, yeah, and I have a mortgage, and that's great. I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with banks. I'll admit that. But they're advertising to the politicians on a nonstop basis, and you and I don't see a lot of this advertising. And what's their message, John? Let us help you create jobs. Chase Bank reported $54 billion in profit last year. That's 54 followed by 9 zeros in profit. As our governments just get further and further in debt, our governments all over are further and further in debt. I had a finance guy tell me the other day there are 13,000 bonds, municipal bonds in Colorado. Well, the airport probably has 20 or 30 of those. City of Denver probably has a handful of those. The Denver Public Schools has a handful of those. The water department has and I'm still in the city of Denver, So, it's, and to expand on that word banking, I want to look at financial and finance staffers and what have you, because I see it's a convergence of financial greed between a lot of the financial people that work for the city of Denver and a lot of the bankers. For instance, our CFO, Nicole Doheny with the city of Denver, she worked for Barclays before the city of Denver. Barclays is owned by BlackRock. Well, if you work for Barclays, and I think her job was public investments, I'm not totally sure, but I think that's what her department was. You are working to take government debt up as high as you can, because that is good for Barclays and the owners of Barclays. But Nicole, if you go work for the city of Denver, you need to sit on the other side of the table, but they don't. So she just keeps working at all these big bond projects. She's going to work on this bond project for 6 months. What else is she going to do? I don't think our government should have finance departments. I think they should have accounting departments. Are
you pointing your gun in the right direction? Because we've got 5,000 governments in the state of Colorado. All of them likely have some sort of bond package or some sort of banking in there. I know you're going to be focused on this one, or you're going to focus on the debt package that's going to the ballot, and the city council is still trying to put a ribbon on it to see what it's going to do. Would it be better to try to pass an initiative that says no more debt?
Absolutely. I think that would be great, and I would like to do an initiative that says, hey, you need to take it to the voters, even if it's an enterprise zone, because the enterprise zones do not need to take it to the voters. That's specifically excluded from Tabor law. And so, for example, the airport doesn't need to take it to the voters. The airport goes to city council when they want $800 million, and the airport's borrowing money to pay their debt. People say, oh, well, that debt's for when they built it. No, it's not the original debt from that airport.
So you're telling me that DIA's debt package right now has nothing to do with the construction of the airport a quarter century ago?
No, or the construction going on today. The construction, and I have their financials. Last year they paid $84 million in construction costs. They gave $554 million to the banks for debt service.
What was the debt used for?
I think it's used to operate that airport. If you look at the executive office, their chief of staff and the finance department, that's $80 million in payroll expense right there. And I also think that the debt's being used to make their debt payments. I mean, that
$80 million in payroll to whom?
To the executives and their staff at that airport.
It's got to be more than just the executives and their staff. It's got to be all the employees, I would think, of of DIA, those who work for DIA.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine that Phil Washington, if he's still the guy there, and his top brass are making $85 million.
Well, if you include the finance department and the chief of staff, those three lines add up to 80 million on that budget. The personnel services come up to about 500 million, and that would be the general labor.
That is an expensive airport. Wrap this up for me. Put it in a bow. I know you're diving into DIA. What is it that people need to know about debt at our airport? What is the story there?
The debt at that airport's 10 billion and more on 1.5 billion in revenue. That's a debt to revenue of 700 to 800%, John. I've never seen a debt to revenue of 700 to 800%. You would never get that in the real world of business. They call that airport a business. They say it doesn't affect your taxes. We create our own revenue here. But what they're doing is they're taking our money and giving it to the bank. So every time we use that airport, we're paying 40% more than we should for parking, for rental fees, customer fees, passenger fees, all these fees that go on your airline ticket that are going to the city of Denver. Chase Bank and Wells Fargo both report that 50% debt to revenue takes you into a new category of business called risky business. At 100% debt to revenue, say a restaurant owes 100% of their revenue for the year, that restaurant's never getting out of that. First of all, why are they that far in debt? Well, because they're losing money and they're so deep in debt. But that airport's 700 to 800%. The banks continue to lend money to that airport as much as they can because they know darn well that they are going to get paid. They know that airport is going to take as much money from you and me every time we use it and all the other citizens, and they're going to pay the banks. That airport, it would be bankrupt in the real world of business. You would never, ever get that much debt. You would never, ever get up to 700% debt to revenue in the real world of business. But it's a government monopoly that has government authority to take as much money from you and I as they want.
As this vote is going to come up sooner than we realize this November, what questions should Denver voters and voters in other cities and their own cities be asking? What is the question that should be tickling the backs of brains in Denver?
What I would say, what is our total cost this year that we've given to the banks for debt service, including certificates of participation? You know, how much money are we wasting, and how much money have we wasted over the past 5 years? And if that's 2 billion or 3 billion, what could we have bought? Could that have already bought everything we're already talking about? Yeah, or it could have reduced, taxes by a lot if you're on the right? And so the question is not about default, and it's not about what we're going to buy, and it's not about how much debt we have. For me, the question is, how much did we waste on debt service over the past year, the past 5 years, the past 10 years, at every...
And it's worth noting that over the last 10 years, we've seen some of the lowest interest rates up until Biden inflation that we've ever seen. In fact, a lot of people said now's the time to go into debt back then. People wanted more information about Citizens for No New Debt. Where do they go?
Citizensfornonewdebt.org.
Can they get them one of them fancy T-shirts that you brought here?
Yes, sir.
Citizens.
Yes.
I like that one.
And we have yellow postcards. This is actually our third printing on this. And these are campaign postcards. And we don't have the ballot number on that because that won't be there until the city of Denver, the Denver City Council votes on it, and then it'll go to Denver elections to get a 4A, 5B, whatever the number is. So it's just vote for no more debt. If I can throw a little pitch in there, we are looking for money for this campaign. I want to win, and I want to mail a postcard.
Maybe you ought to take out a loan for it.
Well, I would love to. I want to mail a postcard to the voters, or 2 postcards, and I'd like to raise about $100,000 to get that done. So, Citizens for No New Debt, and take a look. If you like what you see, please help us along, and we can win in November. Like I said, the mayor lost his bid for more, government housing last November. So the voters, if we get the message out there, the more we get our message out there, the more their message, the mayor's message, it just falls apart. It falls apart. It's based on math. Our message is math.
Message is math. I like that. I don't know if you're going to be able to get rid of debt, but I think questions need to be asked of what is debt sustainability. And we spend a lot of time talking about environmental sustainability. We don't take any time talking about fiscal sustainability. The nation is on a crash course, and it's going to be ugly. It is not sustainable. Do we want Denver to emulate what the federal government is doing? We need to make sure that our debt is constrained. There's a great group called Truth in Accounting that they do a wonderful analysis of different cities, and they've done it about Denver. I don't have their statistics, but you ought to go check that out. Because,
I do.
And they do a balance sheet of what is owed versus what the city owns, the value of the buildings, the value of the land, in the same way that people do a profit and loss sheet or net value of who they are. What's my house worth versus what I own on it? And you'll find that most governments have more in debt than they have in assets. I wouldn't be, and I believe Denver's in that same position. Jason, thank you so much, and thanks for
thank you so much.
Thanks for the real Coke.
Thank you for having me.
What was it? It's the real thing.
Let's do this again as we get closer to the campaign. Okay.
Let's see what we can do. Think freedom.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.